Hello and welcome everyone to the Rumi Forum Luncheon Series. Today we have with us Kevin Chavous. He will speak to us about the state of public education and the future, and its future. Mr. Chavous is a noted attorney, author, and national school reform leader. As a former member of the Council of the District of Columbia and chair of the Council's Education Committee, Mr. Chavous was at the forefront of promoting change with the district public school system. His efforts led to over $500 million new dollars being made available to education for children in D.C. A leading national advocate for school choice, Mr. Chavous helped to shepherd the charter school movement into the nation's capital. Under his Education Committee chairmanship, the D.C. charter school movement became the most prolific charter school jurisdiction in the country, with over 20% of D.C.'s public school children attending charter schools. In addition, Mr. Chavous assisted in shaping the district's three-sector education partnership with the federal government. That partnership led to $50 million new dollars, federal dollars, for D.C. public schools, D.C. charter schools, and it funded the first federal scholarship program to allow 2,000 low-income children to attend private schools. Since leaving the council, Mr. Chavous has emerged as one of the nation's most respected and influential education reform leaders. He is a distinguished fellow with the Center for Education Reform and serves on the board of the Black Alliance for Educational Options. He also is a co-founder and chair of Democrats for Education Reform and a founding member of the Education Equality Project. More recently, Mr. Chavous led the team working with Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal that advocated for the recently passed scholarship program in New Orleans. As a result of that legislation, nearly 1,000 students are now attending private schools of their choice in the New Orleans parish. An early supporter of Barack Obama, Mr. Chavous served as a member on the Education Policy Committee of the Obama presidential campaign. Mr. Chavous is a partner at the law firm of Sonnenschein Nath Rosenthal LLP. So if you all will have a warm welcome for Mr. Chavous.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and speaking with us today.
Well, it's good to be here, Jenna, and I hope you're doing well today.
Yes, very well, thank you. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
I think what I'd like to do is set the table, so to speak. I think one of the challenges we have in understanding what's going on in our schools and what's going on in education is that we don't really understand how we got to where we are.
Right.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about, the actual state of public education, the readiness of our children or the lack thereof, and then how this public education system came into being. First of all, the reality is, on a serious note, no matter what people want to say to the contrary, by and large, we are failing to educate our children the way we should in this country. And it is, I think, one of the greatest American tragedies that is, as strong a nation as we are, we still have over half of the children of color, African American and Latino children, over half that enter high school don't graduate. In some cities, that statistic is blown out of proportion. For instance, in the place of my birth, Indianapolis, 81% of the black boys that enter high school drop out. So that means only 19% graduate. And then when it comes to, so that's on the one hand, the achievement gap is growing. It's growing wider than it was in 1990 when it comes to the difference between the learning for white kids and kids of color. But then on the other hand, we have fewer advanced placement courses. We have fewer opportunities for talented and gifted children to get what they need. So we do have a critical problem. That's not to say that everything is failing, because we have some great public schools, we have some great schools doing some great things. Sure. But the way I like to look at it is, our goal should be that each and every child should receive a high quality education. And if they're not, and if there are segments of the population where we know they're not, then we're not living up to our true value. So how do we get there? Again, I think it's important to understand how public education got set in this country. You know, the founding fathers, starting with Thomas Jefferson, really believed passionately that every citizen must be able to read, write, and count and understand arts and sciences so they could be participants in this participatory government that was our new democracy. And they felt like that even though a lot of our early American citizens were farmers, they felt that we need to do something to make sure that their children are educated. So Jefferson suggested that for every 4 or 5 square miles there would be some citizen who would gather all the children in the area together and teach them in the arts and the sciences and in math and in reading. And over time it became clear that it needed more structure, and that led to the first compulsory attendance law, championed by Horace Mann and others in Boston in the 1830s. And by the time we got to the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century, 1800s, we had this system that was set up so that the school day was set, the curriculum was set, and the curriculum and the education of children was based on age and instruction level. So in other words, that's when the grade designations took place. That's when the 9 to 3 school day was put in place. That's when the summers were decided that should be the off time. And a lot of people don't know the reason why this schedule was put in place. It was based on the Industrial Revolution reality at the time. Kids had to work in the farms, and they wanted to work in the farms before 9, and they picked that time at 3 o'clock to give them time to get home to go work in the fields. And they had the weekends off to work in the field, and then they had the summers off to work the fields. Well, when we put this system in place, that was during the Industrial Revolution. Most schools today have the same schedule. And the point I like to make is when we put this curriculum in place that led to the system that we have, there weren't cars, there weren't planes, there weren't electric lights. And everything else in our human existence has changed over the last 150, 200 years, except for what we do in schools. And in fact, even in terms of the curriculum and the instruction, I give the example of algebra. If you went to a public school in this country, more than likely you took algebra in 9th grade. And your grandmother did, and your great-grandmother. And the example I like to give, what's wrong with a smart, enterprising young person taking it in 7th grade? Well, if you try to do that in the school system, you try to force something different from what they tell you you're supposed to do at the time you're supposed to do it, you need an act of Congress to get it done. And, what's wrong with a child who may need a little more time taking algebra in the 10th grade or 11th grade? It's virtually impossible. So the main point behind this is if you're trying to understand how we got to where we are, part of it is because we're stuck on where we were back then, and there's been little readiness to change that. So it's fascinating when we think about it, because in effect, I think part of the reason for us having our failure in education is we try to force each and every child into a system and force them to learn at the same way at the same time, as opposed to what other countries are beginning to do, which is put a system in place that meets children where they are and sets up individual plans to educate children based on their aptitude and their ability to take certain things at certain points in time. So it has led to devastating results. And when I was on the DC Council, it became clear to me that our one-size-fits-all approach, was almost like trying to fit a circle in a square. I mean, you just can't do it. And that's when I got into the charter school movement. And I felt that, we need some way to break up this fixation with the notion of that's the way we've always done it. Because every time you talk to, traditional educators about, well, why don't you try this? well, we've always done it this way, you know. But with today's kids, and we saw this during the drug epidemic in a lot of our cities, those kids aren't going to relate to teaching practices that worked in the 1940s or 50s. It's a different dynamic out there. And so when I took over the education committee on the council in the late 90s, and we put in the charter school law, you know, a lot of people need to understand and appreciate charter schools are public schools, because a lot of folks think they're private schools, but they are public schools. They're funded by the public, and they are responsible to the public and to the government that sanctions them. The difference between a charter school and a traditional public school is that a traditional public school is really part of a system where the principal and everyone in that system reports to a superintendent. But a charter school is only responsible for that school. They have a governing board, and they have goals and timetables in terms of what they're going to do for kids. They have a yearly audit. They have a yearly site review. They have to monitor their curriculum, but they are just responsible for those kids. So if a principal at a charter school needs a substitute teacher, if the board's okay with it, they'll go get them. If they need to renovate the gym, then they'll do it. In the traditional system, what happens is the politics have gotten in the way of resource distribution. So if you're in a traditional public school and a principal needs a substitute teacher, you've got to requisition downtown and wait for them. It could take weeks to get a substitute teacher you need today. Or if you have a gym, a leaky roof, or a gym that needs some repairs, you got to sign a request, send it downtown, 4 or 5 people check off on it, and it could take weeks to get the gym fixed. So the thing about the charter movement, which has really, I think, made it beneficial for children and families, is it gets rid of the bureaucracy. It says, you know what, we're going to trust you, principal, to run this school and run it for these kids, and we're not going to force you to deal with layers of bureaucracy to get resources. You know, in D.C. we've had tremendous success with our charter schools, and I think this is what's been instructive and beneficial around the country. We've had a variety of different charter schools. For instance, when we got started in the late 90s, we put in place the Seed Residential Charter School. It is the first residential school of its kind in the nation, and it's 150 boys, 150 girls. They live on a college-like campus, and some, not all, but some come from some challenged backgrounds, homes that don't do them any good, and now these kids who come from some of these challenged backgrounds live in their high school, and they do well. You know, they were on Oprah. Oprah bought them all computers and furniture for their dorms, and they graduate at a 90% rate and go to college. Some of those kids, if they had been forced to stay in that traditional school where they were before, they would have never made it. And so SEED has been an example of how you use innovation and creativity and the charter movement to try to create an option for kids that wouldn't work in the traditional system. Another school we started years ago was at the time it was Marriott Hospitality High. You know, Bill Marriott is here and the company's here. He and members of the hotel and restaurant industry came together, and they wanted to set up a high school tailored for children who had an interest in hotel and restaurant management or in the culinary arts. So, you know, have those kids now go straight into programs or the companies that they've worked with while they were in high school. Some have gone to become chefs to the culinary arts schools around the world. Some have gone straight into college. We've got now a Chinese immersion charter school where the focus is on Chinese language. We've had a Muslim charter school. We've had early childhood education schools. We had the Cesar Chavez School for Public Policy. We've had the the Maya Angelou School for troubled children. But the point is that you can tailor this approach in a way where parents and families can look at all these offerings. It's like when you go through a menu line, you know, we just ate, and you may want this, but you may not want that. and your child may need this, but they may not need that. The way it is in our traditional school system is you don't have a menu. You just say you have to eat this, and that's all you can eat, even if you have the taste for it, or even if you're allergic to it, which has happened to a lot of our kids. So I'm very excited about the fact that the country is recognizing there's a problem. There's a real focus on education being a top priority, and I think the country has an openness to consider different ways of reaching our children. And I tell you, to me, it's the most important priority we have. You know, one final thing, as we've started to look at what's going on in education around the world, many countries, I mean, Turkey is one, you know, Sweden is another, Belgium is another, you know, some of the Asian countries, many countries have focused on the fact that they have to tailor their approach to the best interests of children, as opposed to forcing children into a system that may not work for them. And that's why these other countries are outpacing us. You know, we used to be in the top 2 or 3 among industrialized nations in the world on educational outputs, the United States. You know, now we're in the 20s because these other nations are beginning to see that an investment in children means a focus on those children as opposed to system preservation.
I'm wondering, as you're talking, going back to the history of education and public school systems and how it has stuck to the same system of our even great-grandparents. I was one of those kids who took algebra in 9th grade.
Yes.
And geometry in 10th. And so,
I should have taken it in 11th grade. I needed more time.
Yeah, I probably did too. But I'm wondering how, so talking about that, I'm wondering how the charter school system has helped 2 things. How the charter school system has helped kids gifted, challenged. We are dealing with a very high rate of attention deficit disorder.
Yeah.
Which I firmly believe if we can, those kids can learn, and they can learn in a normal way, but we need to change how we teach them that. Has the charter school system at all addressed these issues?
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's an excellent question, Jenna. And in fact, let's start with the time needed for children to learn. I mean, in his most recent book, Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell talks about the fact that there's a common variable among some of our most successful and most talented people, no matter what they do, and that common variable or theme is time spent on task.
Right.
You know, and he has this theory that if you have natural talent and you spend about 10,000 hours trying to learn your trade, you will do well. And he uses the Beatles, and he uses all these other examples, and pilots, and so some of our better charter schools have from the very beginning thrown out this idea of 9 to 3, and they've thrown out this idea of summers off. So you've got some of our charter schools, they start as early as 7 in the morning because they feed children, and then they have because some of our children from poor communities are hungry, and then they have classes starting at 8:30. They go into a 5. Then they have study hall, and then it becomes sort of a community endeavor because then parents come in and can take GED classes, or you know they have bring in nurses, you know, so they can get physicals. So you have a whole range of services that go beyond the traditional school model, and a lot of these same schools have year-round school. They may take a couple weeks off in the summer because the thinking is that if these kids are so far behind, they need more time on task. Another way is that C school, the residential school I talked about when we talk about curriculum and being stuck in one approach. The C school brings in kids at 7th grade and goes all the way up to the 12th grade. But when they bring these kids in the 7th grade, some of these kids, because of the school they went to, may be 2 or 3 grades behind. So they evaluate these kids, they test them, they talk with them, and then they say, you know what, we're putting together an individualized plan for you. Because the goal for all these kids is to pass the 11th grade equivalency test. So they say, we're going to get rid of grade designations. For you, Johnny, you're supposed to be in the 7th grade, but you are 2 grades behind. So we're going to spend this year getting you to the point where you can pass the 11th grade equivalency test.
So very success-oriented.
Very success-oriented.
Everyone's going to achieve.
Everyone's going to achieve. And these kids go around and say that they jokingly refer to it as the gate, that they got to pass through the gate. So when that first year finishes, they may have made up 1 grade, but they may not be where they want to be. So they don't go to the 8th grade. What they do is they say, well, I'm still working to get through the gate. So you have all these kids walking around saying, I'm working to get through the gate, get through the gate. Their big focus is that 11th grade test. And I think they have a 98% passage rate. All these kids make it through the gate. Then they become 12th graders, and then they can get ready for college. So again, the focus is on where these kids are. And for some of those kids, you know, they may take the standard class, but because they may need a little more help, then they put them in a different situation to give them additional help, or they may take another class here or there. You know, I think, Jenna, that the approach that we should take in schools is, yes, you need structure. Yes, you need an improved curriculum, but we should be completely flexible based on the needs of children, as opposed to saying, okay, you passed, move on.
With the goal being success.
The goal is success.
Yeah.
The goal is success. But, you know, I do think that there's a strong willingness to look at things in this way. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I do know that if we continue to do it in the way we've done it over time, it's not, I mean, you know, this is the Facebook, Google generation. This is not the Industrial Revolution where kids are working in the field. These kids don't get their hands dirty unless they're playing with their BlackBerry.
Right, and there are plenty of examples of success within this framework of trying to, you know, make it so, you know, how best does the individual student learn? You know, there are plenty of success stories within the charter school movement. I'm assuming for the public school to look at with this. It's not a, well, how do we do that? It's been done. So I want to move on to Obama.
Yes.
And his approach and his public school agenda. I know that you have worked with his campaign, and so I'm sure you've been following this closely, given what you do. So can you briefly describe that?
Well, I mean, I have to say I'm very pleased and impressed with the president. I was on his education policy committee during the campaign, and you know, we'd have these conference calls, and you know, this is a Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party has generally been tied to the special interest that has kept the schools status quo in the schools. So some of those calls and meetings were pretty spicy, because you had some folks saying, well, we just need more money for schools, we'll focus on early childhood, and they didn't even want to, some of the folks didn't want to talk about charter schools or accountability or performance measures. But to the president's credit, I mean, I think that he realizes, as he says, that this is the top priority, and we can't just keep doing it the same way. I know his Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, and he has said repeatedly that he is going to use the resources that he's gotten through the stimulus to not just give money to states, but to try to tie that money to reform measures. And states are going to have to be able to show that, you know, that they are moving the ball forward in terms of reform, or they won't get as much money as they could. And for example, you know, many states, even though they may have successful charter schools, because of the politics and the union politics, you know, some states have passed laws to put a cap or a limit on the number of charter schools. And Obama has made it clear, we want every state to lift those caps. You shouldn't put artificial limits on good schools. I mean, you know, I know in Arkansas, for instance, they had a cap that you could only have 9 charter schools in the whole state, and I think 6 of the 9 were in the top 15 of all the performing schools. And so why would you put a cap on 15?
Well, then I think that shows a mistrust in the system, right, by the majority or whoever's making those decisions. So hopefully
that will change.
It will change.
But I do think Obama gets that, and we can't lose sight of the fact that the money he's given to education is unprecedented. I mean, you know, $5 billion of new money to go to education. and so this is a real opportunity, but it just can't go to feed an existing bureaucracy. I mean, it has to be tied to reform and things that are going to make sure our kids learn.
All right. I think that, can we open it up to or open it up for questions at this point? Okay. I will get the first question. The moderator. Something very close to my heart.
Now make sure it's a nice question.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
I will. I'll try. I think it's pretty tame. Something very close to my heart is multicultural education.
Yes.
And teaching of cultures to one another and to recognize that. And also touching on, we have a friend, her name is Susan Douglas. She's at Georgetown University. She's in the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. And she's written a lot of curriculum for schools and how schools can teach religion without it being, in a public setting, without it being something that is, that these are cultures, these have been around since the beginning of man. We should teach it as such. It's not necessarily, it has to be a thing of separation of church and state. So anyway, could you touch on those topics?
I mean, look, I think that what's so exciting about living in this time, I feel infinitely blessed because we're about to have a major explosion in terms of people's notion of inclusiveness and multiculturalism and tolerance and acceptability. I think we're going to move into this area or this era where there's just going to be one global world, and it's going to be the human race. And I don't want to sound overly, optimistic, but I think that our president sort of helps with that. I think other world leaders are, and our children are driving it because those of us who are over 40 have been part of the problem. And I think this new generation really gets it in terms of, that they don't look at these artificial indicators just because of the way a person's pigmentation may be or the way they look or if they have beautiful hair like you or none like me. It doesn't matter, and so, but I think that this is an exciting time, but we have to make sure that education keeps up with that. I think that we have to upgrade our approach to inclusiveness, to multiculturalism, to acceptability. We have to make sure that our schools upgrade their curriculum.
Oh, and I think this is one area that the U.S. can rise back again in the public school system, in the charter school system, and the school system in general to, the top.
Yes, there's no doubt about it.
Because of our uniqueness in our nation of multiculturalism. So this could actually be an opportunity.
And I think what helps in D.C., and I've talked to some friends who are affiliated with the Rumi Forum that. We need to start some of these specialty charter schools, which helps to grow that experience. I mean, that Chinese immersion school in near Capitol Hill, it has children from all walks of life, and they speak Chinese all day, and they're in their second grade, and it's just a terrific experience. And they're not just Asian. I mean, there are all kind of kids in there, and I think that we need to do all we can to give as many different options and educational approaches so that then grows the tolerance level of a community.
Absolutely. All right. So, yes. Okay, Cynthia. I just think he needs to get you the...
Harold Ford, a good, wonderful guy.
I'm sorry, can you say your name?
Oh, I'm Cynthia.
Yes.
Cynthia Butler,
Yes.
lawyer, random blogger. I love Harold Ford, and he wrote this op-ed, posted it to my blog even, and he said what we need to do is we need to get everybody who's interested in this in a big discussion at the White House. And he wanted to invite even the Catholic educators. And there's been a lot of things that are sort of harming Catholic education coming down that people are upset about, and I'm not really all that well versed in exactly how the laws were tweaked to do that. But is there some way, in your view, to include, because the history of Catholic education is really wonderful.
Yes.
And I understand you're going to be writing an op-ed on it as well.
Yes.
And they've done so much in terms of the statistics of people that have moved forward to college, and So what, in your view, what could be done or should be done, and if you could, as a lawyer, address the separation of state establishment clause issues with respect
Yeah.
to all that?
Well, I mean, it's clear. First of all, the Supreme Court spoke several years ago on this issue of, you know, public money being used to fund K through 12 education. But keep in mind, there's already precedent there. I mean, you've got the Pell Grants, you've got the GI Bill, where public dollars are going to colleges and universities to educate American citizens, and some of these colleges, universities are Catholic or some other religious group runs these colleges, and so, you know, I think that the real challenge in this area of vouchers or scholarships is that the union does not want them to occur, and the union is a huge political force in American politics, particularly among Democrats. I'm of a mind that, you know, I went to Catholic schools and I went to a Jesuit high school. It worked for me. I went to an all-male high school. It wouldn't work for everyone. See, I think that we should always err on the side of putting more options out there as opposed to less. I know I keep saying the same thing, but that's the American way. That's what drives the consumer in everything. You know, when you go to Best Buy, it's not just Toshiba you've got there. You've got all these different products, and you know what? All of them sell. There's a demand for all of them. And once you start limiting those options, I mean, cell phones, everyone talks about Blackberries and iPods, you know, but once you start limiting those options, once you have a monopoly in place, then the quality will go down, you know, because the competition, the expansive options lead to better quality, because people have to compete to get your attention and to get you to want to sign up with them. I think that what needs to be done in terms of, you know, what's going on with some of our Catholic schools. See, in a lot of our cities, in DC it's like this. Thank goodness we had these Catholic schools, because our traditional public schools were failing our kids miserably. And I think that there should be some high-level discussions to talk about ways that we can work with, you know, the various archdioceses and some of our major cities to continue to offer what otherwise kids wouldn't get. And so, you know, many of us are having some of those discussions with, you know, the mayor and the secretary. And I'm a big believer in Catholic education, but I'm also a big believer in anything innovative and creative that can reach kids.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned was treating all kids as if they were equal. And I've been working around this thing a long time with a lot of teachers in my family. I think that we've become obsessed with the idea of equality.
Yeah.
And we've confused equality before the law and equality of opportunity with equality of talent.
Right.
And you hit it very well on the head that seed comes in and judges where the person is. It's like a doctor. He doesn't give you a prescription blindly. He checks you out to see if you've got a problem
That's
here,
right.
there, otherwise. How can we overcome that? Because there's no child left behind means no child gets ahead.
Yeah.
The only way you can achieve that.
Yeah, yeah. Now that's an excellent question, because I tell people all the time, you know, folks, we've sort of, you're so right, we sort of turned it around. We put these expectations out there that every kid should go to college, every kid should be a doctor, lawyer, whatever. Look, the bottom line is, when I say every child has equal access, that's what I mean. Every child should be able to meet his or her potential and fulfill their life dreams. And like Dr. King said, you know, whatever it is, be the best at it. If you're going to be a carpenter, be the best carpenter you can be. If you're going to be a plumber, be the best plumber you can be. The problem in our schools is we cut kids off before they even are in third grade. They don't even know who they are, and we're cutting off a whole world of opportunity. And I think the way to overcome that is what I alluded to. See, I think that starting in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, I think that those teachers, those caregivers, have to be very, very adept at trying to assess where some of these kids are, and not label them, not stereotype them, you know, not demonize them. When I've seen the way some of these parents and some of these caregivers talk to these kids, there's no wonder they have problems in their second and third grade, and they're being talked down to and told they're not this and they're not that. I think we have to be uplifting, but at an early age, we need to see where those interests of these kids are. We need to expose them to the arts. Because, you know, you could have a Picasso who's never picked up an art brush until he's 13. You gotta expose them to a wide range of things, and then, you know, build a curriculum, give them opportunities to meet their potential in different ways. If a kid has an aptitude in math that you can see in the first grade, then you know what, by the time they're in second grade, we're going to give them more than just second grade math, and we're going to have someone work with them. If you introduce these kids to instruments, and there's some kid who's a kindergartner who's never picked up an instrument in their life, and they pick up a trombone and they start making some sense with it and it sounds good, we need to tailor that something for that kid. See, I think that education and the ability to learn is innate in all of us, but we frustrate that by not even exposing our kids. And I think you're so right. Equal access doesn't mean that everyone is equal, but equal access means that everyone's going to have an equal chance to maximize on whatever talents they have. And that's what I think education should do. You know, finally, you know, this is so important. We are so used to labeling and typecasting people. We're so used to writing off kids before they're even out of elementary school. Just think if we turn that around. You know, I was in Asia, and they in Taiwan visiting a school for some mentally challenged kids, and you know, they have a system there where they believe everyone has value. So they have professions set aside for children who have some mental challenges, and they spend all their high school learning to work at, you know, the cash register. They work in the McDonald's. They work in the Kentucky Fried Chicken. And this Saturday morning, they were about to graduate. It was a school. They had 200 or 300 kids, 200 or 300 parents, and it was like a rock concert. They were clapping because these kids had passed their tests. They were going to graduate and they were going to go straight into a job, and everyone was celebrating. No stigmas attached. They knew they were going to be productive. And just think of how we treat people who are different like that here. You know, where, you know, the kids are made to feel like they don't count and they don't have value. And I think that's the exact opposite of what I saw over there. And it showed me that you can tailor a system around equal access and make everyone feel like that they're a part of it.
Absolutely. You have a follow-up, sir.
Yes, I've been following the SEED program, and I'm very impressed. The only problem is, from what I can see, it's about $80,000 per student, roughly. So if we were to do that, we'd have to convince the voting public to increase the expenditures for the schools. And one of the problems, you mentioned that our president has issued an unprecedented amount of money. You could say the same with George Bush. Yeah. He increased the Department of Public Education more than anyone before him, in fact, more than doubled it. So I think we've got to figure out how we can come up with a program that'll work and get away from the old Prussian system, which was more interested in creating subjects instead of citizens. Yeah. And it's going to be a tough haul because, as you said, there's a lot of status quo we've got to overcome.
No, I think you're right. And the one thing I'll say, when I put the SEED program together, I didn't know it was quite that much, but it is a lot. But when we put it together, what was unique about it, we pulled not just education dollars, but money from human services. Because we said, look, all those intervention programs you're using, you know, there's a good argument to be had that if you put it into the education, then you won't need some of those dollars for intervention down the road, community intervention means. And, you know, business understands this. I don't know if you all have heard this, but there are prison management companies, folks who manage our correctional institutions in this country, that look at the 3rd and 4th grade test scores in certain states to track where the growth will be in prisons. Yeah. So they actually monitor the educational outputs for 3rd and 4th graders. So if they see that in Chicago the 3rd and 4th grade test scores are going down, then they start going there knowing that the prison population will grow in 10 years. Because there's a direct correlation when 80% of these kids and these young people in prison don't have a high school degree. They know and this is how business thinks. They can track and project. So my thing is, as opposed to spending that money in prison, let's pull from some of those dollars and get it right so those 3rd and 4th grade test scores are rising.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating when you think about it.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And then, yes, okay. Yes, sir.
See where I'm at, I better stay seated.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, name's Charles Bale, private citizen. One of your status quo institutions, you mentioned about the grades being, kind of however the kid is. How does that work out with athletics? I know full well if some kids in too early or too late, somebody's going to be screaming to the high heavens.
Yeah.
And another question you almost partially answers about the opportunity. Is the teachers union killing it, or is it so that Barack Obama's kids don't have to deal with some dirty ghetto kid next to them?
Well, I mean, on that one, I think that the union has pressured a lot of Democrats to try to kill the scholarship program. And I think, frankly, President Obama, if he were talking privately, I think that he would support the program. But the politics and the pressure associated with it has been really, really intense. And I'm hoping that we will, as I tell people in this piece I wrote that I think will appear in the paper, look, I'm of the mind, many of you may not remember Malcolm X. I mean, Malcolm X,
I do.
Malcolm X, okay. Well, Malcolm X did a real service for the civil rights movement and Dr. King. Because when he used the phrase, by any means necessary, it sent a chill down the spine of America. And they said, you know what? We don't want this guy, Dr. King, come on, See, I think we're at the point in education that it's a by any means necessary moment. That we need to educate, not just, some people say, well, we got to fix the whole school system. Well, that will take years, and I want to fix the whole school system. But while we're studying how we fix the whole school system, let's fix one child at a time. Let's get at least as many of these children as we can into these programs that work, and let's give them opportunities, because we can't lose any more generations. Now, when you talk about athletes, look, I think that the rules have always been somewhat more flexible for athletes, but I tell you what's really been good. The NCAA has put some standards in place. They also have these mandatory mentors and tutors for these athletes, and the bottom line is there are always going to be people to play the rules, bend the rules, because athletics brings a lot of money in. But my view is that if you deal with giving these kids, even athletes, more of what they need in the early grades, you have a stronger chance that they'll be better prepared when they get to be in college. See, what happens is we write these people off because they have talent, and we don't expect them to go to class. But if you're a 2nd and 3rd grader, you can still bounce a basketball. You're still going to have to take 2nd and 3rd grade classes, and that's what schools can help us do if they right size themselves.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, okay.
She's just waiting for this question.
Yes.
I see you.
Yes, my name is Nene Sharikin from House of Creative Writing LLC. I am a mother of 3 American children in public school. It's quite disturbing to hear the percentage of the dropout of the high school students.
Yes.
So my question is, what does the government do for these dropout children? And then the second question is, I did not receive my education here except for graduate studies. So, but of course, I have seen the education of my children. I'd like to hear from you, what is the difference between private senior high school here or private school in DC and with public school here? For example, President Obama sent the 2 daughters to private school, for example. So if I could hear from you, what are the differences, except that the private school students, I think, most of them from the wealthy family?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the big differences between some of our private schools, first of all, there are good private schools, there are bad private schools. There are good public schools, there are bad public schools. But the main difference that you see since private schools charge tuition, then the parents have more of the school has more of an incentive to have quality, because parents aren't going to pay money generally to send their kids to a bad school. And the other thing is they can hire and fire freely to get the teachers they want. They don't have the same work rules that public schools have. Some of the work rules or union rules in public education has created a disaster in terms of quality. For example, you know, in most public school systems, you just can't fire a teacher with tenure. So it doesn't matter if the teacher's good or bad. Most of them don't get yearly reviews, and they have a job for life. And then a lot of principals can't even get rid of a bad teacher. Let's say a principal knows that they've got a bad third grade teacher. They can't fire that bad teacher, and they have to know the system well enough to figure out a way to get that teacher out of the building. As a result, the kids suffer. And so I think one of the biggest differences, as I said, are one, that the parents are more engaged because they're paying the tuition, and the administrators in these private schools have to pay attention to that. And then the private schools don't have to deal with the work rules, and so they can ensure that they have quality teachers in every class. Now, in terms of these dropouts, I mean, you know, ma'am, you asked a really good question, because what are we going to do when over half of the African American and Latino boys in this country continue to drop out and they can't get jobs? Well, one thing we'll do is build more prisons. The other thing that will happen as a result is we will have a permanent underclass that will be predators on us. And when I say us, our community as a whole, because people are going to do what they have to survive. That's how the drug trade took off. So what do we do about that? I think that, again, recognizing not every kid is going to go to college, and nor should every kid, because some kids have talents that they need to start nurturing before going to college. And I think that we've got to upgrade our vocational offerings, because it'd be one thing if the school's academic performance across the board went down and their vocational offerings went up. But their vocational offerings have gone down at the same time their academic offerings have gone down. And I think we have to fight it on the same track. We need to upgrade our academics, expand our teaching approaches, and we also need to upgrade vocational offerings. Because, you know, some of these high-tech jobs, you don't need a college degree to be able to make a lot of money in the high-tech industry. You know, you've got these nursing jobs, you've got these, you know, radiology assistants, you've got construction jobs, you've got architects and engineers. Some of these you just need certificates, but if you have the skill set and understand the technology, you can make a really good living. I think the schools need to do a better job of matching some of their curriculum, you know, with careers. And that would help with some of these kids who may not have gone to college and who may have dropped out or gotten in some trouble. They still can be helped if they're put in the right setting, you know, where they can learn the skills to be successful.
Okay, we have one more question, and I believe the woman in the pink sweater has been waiting quite a while.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a senior from American University, and earlier you mentioned competition. I was wondering what solution you propose to a student who's in a traditional public school and doesn't have a parent who can help them fill out an application for a charter school, or a situation like that, or they just don't want to travel across town to go to a charter school. And also, I was wondering if you find any conflict of interest in the fact that AOL, Gates Foundation, and Walton Foundation are all putting money into a public institution.
On that point, you know, I don't know if there's a conflict. Look, I work in a corporate law firm, and I can tell you, though I have an education practice and you know, I don't do a lot of the business stuff, but I can tell you, they're not the only corporations contributing. You know, I mean, you've got a lot of business that contributes to various educational institutions. A lot of these businesses have philanthropic arms, foundations. I think the key to monitor it is public disclosure. You need to make sure that the public is aware of all these connections. They need to be more aware of the way money flows, and it needs to be publicized. Because I tell you, if you shine a light on these contributions and these relationships, then it makes sure that it backs people up in terms of trying to take advantage of them, or put other folks in a compromising situation. In terms of your question about charter schools and these kids, someone pointed out an interesting fact to me. The vast majority of African American kids who graduate from high school at grade level, that means they're where they need to be, most of those kids still don't go to college. Now, the reason why they don't is a point similar to what you made. A lot of them come from families that never went to college. They didn't fill out the FAFSA form. They didn't know how to fill college applications. Many of our high schools have terrible guidance counselors. So, while we focus on the academics, we have to focus also on life skills and some of the practicalities of just filling out college applications. Some of these kids can't afford college application dollars. And so I think that there needs to be greater attention paid to the guidance counselors and making sure that these kids who have talent aren't their efforts to uplift themselves and frustrated just because of the remedial aspect of filling out an application, or not even knowing that you can get a lot of application fees waived if you come from a low poverty or a poverty situation. And I do think in terms of that, if the guidance counselors see that there are kids with talent that should be in another school, maybe a charter school, then what we should do, we should set up either a charter school resource center that can get the word out, set up tutorials, have Saturday registration, so that kids and families can get information and be educated about how to go through the ministerial application process. Right now, it is sort of scattershot, but you're right, we should do a better job of that. Right. Thank you all for indulging me. I know I was long-winded.
Oh, yeah, why not? Okay, we have one more.
Okay,
last question.
Oh, sure.
Because John we have two neighbor states here, Washington D.C. and Virginia, and the former is one of the most important supporters of the charter school system, and the latter is the least.
Yes.
So what's the reason of this difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. D.C. has really done a great job with charters. Maryland, Virginia have not, largely because the Democratic leadership in that state has resisted efforts for charter schools and choice programs because of the union politics, particularly in Maryland. We see this all over the country where the union fights, all these bills that will create new entities other than the public schools. And I think, frankly, and I'm not hostile to unions, but I'm hostile to anything that's going to get in the way of our children learning. And I think what needs to happen is we need to go through this revolution in our own minds in terms of where we are. Dianne Feinstein said it best as Senator from California when she supported our school voucher program in D.C. We should look at education in this country as the most important bipartisan issue. We should check our party affiliation at the door, and we should make all of our decisions based on one thing: will this help a child learn? And if you look at it that way, then you will support a lot of things that your party tells you not to, because both parties have crazy views of things because they're looking at it with that party filter. And I think that we need to look at all these educational decisions, from funding to whether we have charter schools to any of these things, based on one criteria: will it help a child or a group of children learn? If it's going to help children learn, especially in the wake of the numbers we're facing where we know so many aren't learning, I am wholeheartedly for it. And I don't care if a Republican likes it, or a Democrat likes it, or an African American likes it, or an Asian likes it. I don't care. But if it's going to help one of our children in this country learn, we should be embracing it. That's how stark it is. And I think the problem in Maryland and Virginia is the politics have gotten in the way of, I think, what's doing best for children.
All right, on that note. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.